This panel, our last one, will be the best panel. And so let's do this as we do a little logistics. We're going to take a picture, we're going to exchange water, our panelists are going to come up, and I just wanted to say a note about this particular panel, this subject, as our next panel comes up, which is, and you saw the passion of our panelists and folks in the audience, and basically the issue that we can't wait anymore, and we're tired of waiting. Two things with that. One, we know that there are plenty of people who do things that are against their own economic interest. And so sometimes the argument about this is the right thing to do because for economically you're going to be in last position if you don't act. Sometimes that doesn't make it. But in the spirit of Senator Salazar, who gave us some marching orders in terms of being an action-oriented group, let me add this to the directors in the room. When you go back university, or you can simply do the following, which is you now, having attended this conference and listened to this last panel, and our panelists can go ahead and join the stage if you will, you got some information which many of your staff members, many of management, they do not have. And you sat and you heard these top investors, including the biggest investor on planet Earth, BlackRock, tell you some of the questions that they asked management, your CEO, corporate secretary, or IR firm, when they go into engagement. Loaded with that information, very simply, go back to your general counsel or corporate secretary or chief investment officer, chief investor relations officer, and say, listen, now I heard Michelle, and she was giving us some inside information about sort of the things that she asked. One of the questions that BlackRock will ask is, how do your directors expand their own networks to ensure that their networks are expanding in order to, when they start looking at new board members? And you say, that's what Michelle said she's going to ask, and I'm not sure you, corporate secretary, or general counsel, or CEO, know that they're going to ask that, so I'm giving that piece of information, and better yet, I'm not sure you would know how to answer that. So perhaps, corporate secretary, CEO, IR, you want to circle back with our chair of the Nom and Gov, and get the talking points of how you would answer that question. And when you do that, subtly, you have pulled the needle into a direction and where they will start asking that question. You can have a board discussion. So I promised you two things. One, that this last panel is going to be energized because we have a great moderator. He's the type of professor you wish you had, and you'll see at the end. And after we're done with this, Esther's going to buy you a drink right outside. So our moderator is F. Daniel Siciliano. I'm having so many problems with these vowels. Yeah. By the way, what's the F for? I know you as Dan.
Francisco, actually.
Ah, okay. Well, Dan is here. Professor Dan is here, who is the co-founder and immediate past faculty director, associate dean, and professor with the Rock Center for Corporate Governance at the Stanford Law School. He's also the co-director of the very highly regarded Stanford's Directors College and co-founder and former CEO and executive chairman of LawLogix Group. Let's thank Dan for not only being here to moderate, but he was also part of the board readiness program yesterday and today. So thank you, Dan, for being here. His co-panelists, let's first start with Sarah Holland, and by the way, their bios in the book, so I won't go through them. Is the Public Policy Manager, U.S. Lead on Privacy and Artificial Intelligence at Google. And she's under her name, they did this perfectly. Beatrice Infante is CEO of Business Acceleration and former CEO of a number of companies and an early leader in intelligent IT automation and chair and CEO of Aspect Communications. Welcome, Beatrice. And Cliff Justice is one of our partners at KPMG. He's the principal in KPMG's Innovation and Enterprise Solutions team leading the firm's cognitive automation initiatives. Take it away, Dave.
Great. There's an old joke at Stanford Law School, which is anytime you see a faculty member wearing a tie, it's probably one they borrowed. But more importantly, for today's purposes, so I've been borrowing ties all week, but for today's purpose, I'll relate an anecdote from one of our kind of best and brightest at Stanford, who's in the CS department, completing a PhD in artificial intelligence, and then a bunch of words that are hard to remember right after that. And he said, Professor Cisnano, no offense, but I've never run into anyone who's wearing a tie and knows what they're talking about in AI. Right? So with that in mind, but the reason I didn't take off my tie to start, actually, is because I was afraid Cliff would be wearing one, but I'm really glad that he's not. And those sound people in the back are like, what are you doing to my mic? Take it off. There, they shut off. Okay, now I can put it back on. I'm going to take off my tie. Okay, so, this is our natural, this is called the VC look. This is our natural state of affairs. Okay, with that, let me jump straight in because we have a lot to cover in an artificial intelligence panel that, frankly, it's a big topic. It's changing really fast, has lots of technical aspects, social aspects, policy aspects, and we worked in advance to try to make it as relevant as we could to you. So I'm going to start off with an open-ended question that each panelist is going to answer. Then we're going to do kind of a conversational style. The open-ended question is kind of as follows. With a lot of technologies, but I feel more with AI than a lot of others, you get this early hype, and people are like, it's going to change your life, it's going to be better, it's going to transform everything, look out. And then you kind of wait, and you kind of wait, and you kind of wait, and you're like, it didn't work out, right? So there's this overhyping phase. And then a lot of times, a little later, you look twice, and you're like, and it really is changing everything, and it's kind of underhyped for a while. And I want your reflections on where are we with that? Are we in the overhype, the underhyping, both? Like what is the state of affairs of AI in its real impact on the world right now? Maybe we start with Sarah.
All right. First, thank you so much for having me and having Google here. We're happy to be here. I love this question because I feel like it's kind of an interview question. It's a trick question. And to me, the answer is both. It's both overhyped and underhyped, and it depends on kind of what aspect I think of this suite of technologies we're really talking about. But first, I kind of want to do a poll to the audience. Raise your hand if you think you've used artificial intelligence in the last 2 or 3 years. Oh, okay. So you guys know everything. Yes, you have. You've been using artificial intelligence. So it's this whole spectrum, right? And it can be overhyped, I think, in the debate about superintelligence and some of the stuff that some people have raised concerns about in terms of the long-term future of what may or may not happen. But it's underhyped, I think, in terms of the applications that we're seeing from artificial intelligence. So to me, it can be something as mundane as spam filtering, which for us is really exciting because we can catch, I think it's 99.9% of all spam. And I don't know if you remember like the early days of email where you'd constantly lose messages, you'd have to go in and dig and find your emails, or you were just overwhelmed by junk or malware. Now you don't have that near as much. We can actually catch spam we've never seen before, which is kind of remarkable to think about. Same thing with search. It's about 15%, I think, of our search queries that are new every day. And then the volume of search queries we get, which is in the billions, that's kind of surprising, and it's our job to be really relevant in terms of returning those search results for you. So it's that kind of boring stuff. But what gets really exciting, and I think where we really have a long way to go, is the applications outside of that. So we are doing some work through our Google Brain team on healthcare. We've seen technologists actually at Stanford who have picked up a system that we've open sourced. So we literally gave away our own machine learning library, and anyone can pick it up. And they're using it to create better detection for skin cancer, which is a huge growing problem in our country, as well as elsewhere around the world. We're seeing it with researchers who have picked it up to improve conservation efforts for sea mammals or manatees. Used to, you'd have to hand code pictures, and now you can do that automatically. So those are just some of the examples I think but those are really early days, and there's so much more I think that we need to do to fully realize the potential of this technology. So that's my long-winded answer of saying both.
Great.
Yeah, I think, if I could give a point of reference, if all you guys think back to the year 2016, 2017, somewhere in there, I think 20 years from now you'll realize that this was the year that was like 1995 to the internet. And I was a senior vice president at Oracle working for Larry Ellison at the dawn of the internet age. And three things, very seminal things, happened in 1995. The first of those was that the internet was deregulated. Up until then, it had been really for academic research. And it was deregulated for e-commerce, basically. Second thing is Netscape went public. And for those of us who were Unix programmers, the World Wide Web had been around for 20, 30 years. But it was really only accessible to people like me who could program Unix machines. And Netscape made that available to everybody. And the third thing was a very seminal mail message that Bill Gates sent to his entire company. Microsoft at the time, 90% market share. And the message basically said, the internet is happening. It is going to be a tectonic economic change. And we, Microsoft, are going to have our desktop business endangered. We need to become internet ready today. Right. So fast forward, 2016, three seminal things happened. NVIDIA released a chip, 15 billion transistors, biggest thing on Earth, okay, a microprocessor on Earth, that does neural network acceleration. Google released a neural network version of its language translation, and for those of you that have ever used a, typed in language translation, if you enter in hasta la vista, you'll get some English, and if you enter that back, you'll get something completely different in Spanish than what you typed in. But late last year and beginning of this year, Google's been slowly rolling out a new neural network, Google Brain, underneath, that has yielded orders of magnitude improvement. And then sometime last year, we passed in a single chip, single microprocessor, the total capacity of a mouse brain. And if you know Moore's law, you can extrapolate that it's going to be about mid-2025 or so when a single chip will have the capacity, and capacity is very important, of a human brain. And the thing that enables all of that, if I can explain it very simply, is this notion of a neural net, which, back to your example, neural net learns like a child does. If you show a 2.5-year-old a picture of a cat, a picture of a lion, and a picture of a person in a Halloween costume of a cat, and you say, which one is the kitty cat? Every 2.5-year-old on the planet can name that. Writing a program, programmatically, to figure out what a cat is, very difficult. Neural nets, again, have been around for forever, same as the World Wide Web was. They were actually created conceptually in the 1940s. A neural net learns like a kid does. You show it pictures of cats, cats in trees, upside down cats, cats in profile. And you show that, and then you show them things that are not cats. People in cat costumes, fake cats, toy cats. And a neural net learns like a child, slowly and surely, and you want to make sure you train it properly, because if you mistrain a neural net, you get what Microsoft had, which is within 16 hours of having put up their neural net-enabled chatbot, they had to take it down because it learned to curse at customers.
And we'll come back to the question of legacy data and neural nets, so we'll explore that.
So I just want to leave you with that thought that we're at the very beginning of a massive technology, but mostly economic change that's going to take the next 20, 30, 40 years to fully play out.
Cliff, it's never fun to be the third person on the same open-ended question, but I have faith.
Yeah.
What do you say?
Well, I think it's probably a little bit. I don't know if it's overhyped or underhyped. I do know that this is transformational in a way that we don't understand quite yet. And it has to do more with the social acceptance of working more as partners with machines than we ever have before. I would equate this to, when we really started expanding the electrical grid, there was a period of years before we really knew what to do with electricity. But then once it happened, once companies started figuring out, and inventors started to figure out what to make, power by electricity, it changed the world. I think that's very similar to AI. At first, we're going to see chatbots. We're going to see things that are, kind of limited in their use. But then as it becomes more prolific, it will change everything we know about everything. You know, you're going to have intelligence embedded into every piece of software, into every piece of technology that exists. The interaction and the ability for machines to learn from interactions and never forget and continually improve is going to you know, radically change biology. It's going to change medicine. It's going to change how we deal with defense, how we deal with education, how we deal with poverty. So it's a social dynamic, and it's a technical dynamic. The cloud is a big part of this. This wouldn't happen without the cloud. The massive computing power that is now available with no end in sight. You know, Google is launching a quantum computer, which will, you know, radically change the nature of computing. IBM has a quantum computer. These are going to be delivered to everybody's smartphones. You know, everybody's going to have access to these types of technology. So, you know, it might be a little bit misunderstood today, but you know, there's nothing in our lifetime that is going to be bigger than AI.
You like to joke, you know, you're a skeptic, then you're in denial, and then you're surprised, and then you take it for granted. You know, so we're kind of somewhere along that path. Let me switch gears a little and talk about one of the potential impacts that I think gets a lot of attention, and I'll invite you to be either skeptical or affirm that attention, that concern around the workforce and kind of displacement of people who do work, whether it's blue collar, which is probably not the primary target discussion moment, but it's repetitive white collar, arguably. So I want to dive into that, but I'll first tell a little story that exemplifies the rate of change in this space. So I'm one of those kids who got a paper out so I could buy a hard drive in 1986, right? You know, which had 4 megs and was yay big, and you know, you couldn't shake the table at all, otherwise you'd crash. So I, of course, therefore, signed up for X.AI, which is Amy and Andrew. It's a system that actually will do scheduling for you, and I signed up for it in the first month it was available. $50 a month. It was $49.95 at first. And I gotta tell you, boy, you have one typo in the little internal instruction, and they can't make the appointment. The whole goal is that you copy Amy with so-and-so you want to have lunch with next week, and Amy knows your calendar and goes back and forth with them instead of you, and they make an appointment. Amy puts it on your calendar. I would give it a D+ in the first 5 or 6 months, and then I kind of forgot about it until I looked at my bill. I'm like, I'm paying that $50 still. And then something interesting happened. Right before I decided to terminate it, I went back and I did an appointment yesterday, and it was so much better. It got done, and I had misspelled Tuesday, and I said next week, but my next week wasn't available, and so it was scheduled on the following week. It was beautiful. And today I got an email that said they're dropping the price to $17.85 for everybody a month. So that was interesting and eye-opening. And that story alone, I won't share it with the faculty support group, but that would worry them, because 25% of their time is making appointments on behalf of faculty. And so whether or not it should worry them, I'll let you talk to us about that, but it would strike fear in a lot of they'd be like, what? Oh no. So talk to us about workforce disruption due to AI, and the follow-up questions will tie it to industries that we're interested in. Who wants to go first? Cliff, you get the right of first refusal since you're the last.
So never in history has technology created a world which was worse than before a technology revolution. We had the agricultural revolution, we had the industrial revolutions. It was choppy, it was messy at first. You had you had the Luddites, burning down factories. There's a lot of fear associated with it, and we can't really predict the innovations that come on the backside of these technology revolutions, but they always come. And so, there has to be a little bit of faith, because nobody can tell you what's going to be invented. Nobody could tell you in 1985 that in 10 years from now you're going to have web developers as a profession and as a meaningful part of the workforce and the economy. We don't know. If I knew, I would be, putting all my money in whatever
You'd be a sponsor.
Good. Yeah. Now, we're, in our own firm, we are deploying AI. We're deploying it in big, meaningful ways in the audit, you know, how we audit companies. So we're doing it in the tax area. We're doing it in all areas of consulting where we're, you know, looking for risks. And these are activities that were repetitive. We would pull kids out of school. They would go to Stanford and, you know, think that they're coming to work for KPMG and they're going to wheel around, you know, airports in a Toomey. We put them in a basement for the first 2 or 3 years and give them reams of paper and, you know, a laptop to go through and check controls of a company, look for risk, and it's soul crushing. They hate it. We lose people over that, you know, doing that type of work. Automating that and putting people to work doing what people need, you know, can do and machines can't, which is understanding politics, understanding the priorities of a business. You can identify all these risks. You can't fix all of them. You've got to prioritize it in the context. And that takes communication and interaction and understanding. We're resource constrained when it comes to that. We don't have enough people. Freeing that talent up so that they can go help our partners and our clients work through challenges, you know, that's going to unleash a whole new wave of growth for us as a business, and we'll be hiring more and more people as a result of that.
produce. And that investment has a life cycle, and that life cycle has a lot of stickiness to it in terms of how the company behaves. If there's an underlying transformational shift which alters costs fundamentally, it is easy for companies to attach to the previous infrastructure type to be slow to move, and then there's a great exposure for complete disruption. The best example recently is one that my company narrowly survived, and we did survive it and went on to thrive, and that was, we started in 2000 as cloud. You didn't call it cloud then, you called it ASP, later SaaS. And we did that by opening up all these server farms. We had to have our own server farms. And we had to program in kind of slightly pre-modern languages before there were APIs. So fast forward to 2009 and 10 and 11, we're the leader, but suddenly, instead of $5 million to kind of really get up and running, you know, 2 sophomores at Stanford on a weekend could turn on Amazon Web Services, borrow $100 from their brother, and they could like legitimately potentially compete. And it kind of caught everyone by surprise. So it sounds like AI sets this up, right? Artificial intelligence as a utility potentially means fast forward a few years and someone can replicate something that is being done that's really cool and high value by a company, but they need not spend a lot of money to do it. So with that as one scenario, you can pick others. What do board members do now? I mean, what do they ask about? How do they understand if AI is integrated as a strategic consideration in the management's concept of moving forward? Like, what do you do? Especially if you're like in concrete or in home building or something that isn't obviously technology, where I think the exposure is great in some ways. So what do we do? Maybe, Beatrice, you go first?
Yeah,
Okay.
and we actually talked a little bit about this earlier in connection with the Equifax breach. And the fact that Equifax probably views itself as a credit scoring company, and that's what they do. But in reality, what they are is a data company. And so I think boards need to evolve to, first of all, every company is a tech company today, whether you want it or not, whether you're in cement or concrete or durable goods, every company is a technology company. And so you need to make sure that back in that diversity of thought that you have, I don't mean necessarily a deep technological expert in AI or cybersecurity on the board, but someone who is at least cognizant of the questions to ask of management to make sure that management is providing rational answers and to be able to evaluate the answers for at least some level of, yeah, you're in the right ballpark or you're in the wrong universe, right? So, so I think boards need to be increasingly much more tech savvy. And I would encourage boards to actually think of the same model that you have for whether it's audit or compensation committee, where you bring in consultants. And so if your board feels a concern about cyber or AI, hire somebody. There's lots of people around. Come in, give a small tutorial to the board, or ask them to do an in-depth review of your company. So for example, the Equifax board had said, we don't know anything about cybersecurity, maybe we should be concerned about this. How about if we hire somebody like you guys to come in and do an audit and give us, the board, a report? They might have noticed that they had a security problem. So that's, I think, what's important, is to not just try and cram all that expertise into the board, but to have enough expertise that you know the right questions to ask, what the right answers kind of sort of look like, and then rely on outside consultants to give you a more deep expert opinion.
Yeah, from a board perspective, the existential implications to every business for some of the reasons you just said. Your competition is going to be coming at this with a degree of capital investment that is just a fraction of what it took before. Because of this API economy, you can go to Google and get TensorFlow for free. You can go to Amazon and download the skills set, which is a collection of APIs for Alexa, and develop a customer service engine. This is going to disrupt every company. But there's also there's this defensive strategy that you need to develop in terms of competition. But there's also some real serious challenges around security and cyber. These AI tools are not just in the hands of the good guys. These are also in the hands of criminals and rogue nations who are using AI to leverage attacks, to penetrate systems that, you know, before were almost impossible to get through. You know those CAPTCHA things where you have to type, that's child's play for AI.
Yeah, I get them
Yeah.
right less often. Yeah. I just want to have an activated thing. Yeah,
So it's a holistic strategy to protect the interest of the business is what's needed.
I would just add to that, every single company is a data company, and that means that you need to think about privacy, you need to think about security, but I think the thing that's missing in that conversation, which is, to me, as important, is that you are, the data that you have from your customers or your clients or whoever, that you have a responsibility to add value to that. So think about the data that you already have and figure out how to make it work better for you. We call this data-driven innovation. It's obviously very important to Google. We very much recognize ourselves as a data company, but we want to partner with other people to help them figure out how to make the data that they have already more useful to them. We're seeing a lot of interest and excitement in this in like the retail industry, for example. But figure out, also like kind of get up to speed on these different techniques within artificial intelligence to help understand like what problems you might have where that can be an interesting solution. And there's lots of resources available. You don't have to be a tech expert. We're actually releasing something soon. I wish I could give like a date, but it's going to be, it's essentially nicknamed a machine learning crash course. So it is a lot of what we have used internally to get a lot of our engineers up to speed, many of whom were hired before this AI revolution really took off, to help retrain. And so it's some of the best and brightest we have teaching our fellow best and brightest. But that's going to be opened up, and anyone can take it. I've done a couple of the first courses, and it's really interesting and fun and approachable. So I would say, like, don't be intimidated. Recognize the data you have. Make it work for you. Figure out the problems you have, the energies that you can get, the efficiencies you can get from these techniques. And also, like, go probably hire those 2 sophomores, right? That as exciting as, yeah, you know, competition can be scary, but it also can be a really great thing, right? That a good idea can come from anywhere. And to me, that's amazing, right? Is that it's no longer the gatekeepers of, and to think about what that can do, especially for underrepresented communities, I think is really, really exciting. So there's 1 million academic institutions around the world, a lot of whom are in your backyard. So find them, partner with those institutions, partner with companies. I'm sure my cloud team would want to tell me to, like, you know, come talk to us about cloud, but you know, there's a lot of different services out there, and so I would do that. But don't neglect those academic institutions, and help grow the pipeline of people that are exploring computer science particularly.
And I definitely want to come back to that enablement point. Oh, go ahead, Beatrice, go first.
Yeah, and I had another, back to the director question, which is, it might not be bad to conduct a little theoretical exercise with your board. Because one of the things to think about technology is that in almost all cases, the technology curve, and I'm trying to draw this backwards so you can see it, sort of goes up exponentially this way in terms of adoption or prevalence or whatever. But the economic curve goes sort of the opposite. It's sort of flattish, and in terms of the cost of something in the economic system. Then it crashes, and then it kind of goes to near zero. And so think about what parts of your business, if the cost of it went to near zero, what impact would it have? So the internet, for example, the thing that went to near zero cost was communications and, believe it or not, geographic proximity. Because now someone could buy something online and not have to walk into a store, right? And so think about the things that are, when you do your risk analysis of the business, think about the things that are either in your supply chain or in your employee base or whatever, that from an economic perspective looks different. Because everyone said, oh, the internet changed everything. Well, it didn't change basic economic policy, right? There were still supply chains of things, and there were some things that were more costly and some things that were less costly. And so think about in economic terms, and then think about which one of these could AI make go to zero, and then see what impact it has on your business, and then start doing something about it sort of from that perspective, be proactive about it.
You know it's a good panel when you get so excited you get goosebumps. So I think this is such a good point, and I want to kind of double down on it a little bit so that people can learn to think this way, because it isn't just the cost of production that can go to zero. It's what, and it hasn't stuck yet, so I'll try again. It's Stanford, we developed this phrase. So marginal cost of consumption. It's not the old consumption you learned, but marginal cost of consumption is what's it take to use something. If I gave you an extra free car, most of you would not drive more, because the cost of consumption for the car for wealthy people is not the car, it's not the gas, it's not the insurance. It's the driving. Your marginal consumption will go up when your marginal cost of consumption goes to zero. That's if it drives itself. Because the most expensive thing you do in a car is not be able to do other things. So this whole way of thinking is not only when the cost of production goes to zero, it's when the using of the thing itself that might now be free gets easier and easier. So with that, I want to ask a question which I'm going to set up in the following way, and that is data. I want to double down on the data, and I want you to give some advice about how to turn data into an asset or to think about it correctly. So once upon a time, we used to teach math and finance, and still do to a certain extent, in these elegant formulaic ways, because computation was really expensive. It took a lot of time. In fact, you've all seen Hidden Figures, but before that, World War II, the nation's best mathematicians, who were mainly women, were snatched from all the best universities and sent to Los Alamos, and they were the night shift. And all the physicists would do their work and not do any of the math, leave it in a bin, and then all these brilliant women would come in overnight, and they would race to complete all those computations all night long, and they'd hand it over, and the men would walk in the next day and like, ta-da! Okay, so that's a whole different story, which we can reflect on. But the cost of computation went way down, and it changed everything. The reason a lot of companies don't save data is because it was difficult to collect it. Not true anymore. Then they didn't save it because it was difficult and expensive to store it. Because storage was either 1 megabyte. I paid $800 in 1986. It was horrible. Well, that's no longer true. And then it was difficult to sift it. If you had too much, it was kind of hard to sort out. And then, and this is what changed most recently, even if you could sift it, it was difficult to learn from it. Like, what did it teach you? What did it tell you? And AI flips that, right? So most people think data, hard to collect, no. Expensive to keep, no. Hard to sift through, no. Hard to learn from, legit. But maybe that's changing. So what should companies, every company do to gather more data, careful about privacy and security, do something interesting with that data? Because it's like a moment in time, and I think a lot will look back and say, I wished we'd done something more with that data, because our competitor now knows whatever it is, because they kept more data. What do you recommend?
I think the exciting thing about artificial intelligence with data is the pattern spotting, right? It can detect patterns that a human just can't, because it can't sift through that amount of data. And so I think that's going to be the exciting thing of applying it and what we can learn. There's a team at Google called People and AI Research, PAIR, and I would encourage you to look it up. It's pretty neat. But a lot of what they do, they have some open source tools for data visualization, and it was interesting to where you can actually interrogate the data you have. And we think that that's really important, right? Is kind of think about it as a data custodian or a data steward, and you need to make sure that the data you have is representative, it's not underrepresentative or overrepresentative, that it's free of historical bias, or you're at least taking that into account if the data has historical bias. A lot of the problems that we've seen with AI and bias are coming from the data and the sources. And so as exciting as data is, just make sure that you're asking the right questions and really thinking about that before you apply something powerful like an AI system to that. But the data visualizations, going back to that, it's they're just beautiful, but B, they're really fun to look at of what they're actually learning, and what we can actually see from either things that have been in existence, the new layers of learning we're getting from that. There was one interesting with Translate, which you mentioned, which I love. We actually just released headphones that do real-time translation in your ears. So if you think you're living in the future, you are. But it's really, really exciting the way you can communicate. But what they've learned is when they were doing language pairing, just the dramatic improvements from that. They also learned why the system was learning the way it was. So the data visualization can also help us, interestingly, get better at interpreting the systems of AI. So I would think about the data visualization, and I would make sure that you have someone that's thinking about the custodianship of the data to make sure that you are being thoughtful. There's also a wonderful group called the Center for Data Innovation, based out of Washington, D.C., run by Daniel Castro, and I would encourage you to look up some of his work. He's done some really great work laying the groundwork for this concept he calls data gaps or data deserts, sometimes called data poverty, and the problems that can come when we don't actually have the right data. So it's leading to calls for open data, of not just looking at the data that you already have, but the data that governments might have, for example, and looking at that. And then one last plug, if you want to, there's a platform called Kaggle that Google actually owns, and it's crowdsourced. So it uses a community, I think of 1 million machine learning experts, and they host data sets. So if you have a data set, you're wondering what more you can do with that, check for the privacy and security. Your legal team may also want you to think about intellectual property, as well as a few other things, so talk to your lawyer cats. You can actually host this data for free. So think about those kinds of things, and you can actually open source it and work with partners that can find insights that maybe you weren't initially thinking of. So that's another way you can take a look at it.
And even if only half of that made sense to you, now you have the words with which to hire a consultant to translate and follow up.
Yes.
Or find me afterwards.
Exactly. And I can't emphasize this point enough, which is human beings have a limit in terms of how much data they can absorb. And you could also be data blind in that you have lots of data, but you don't know the right questions to ask. And I learned this, I actually was on the board of a company on Park Avenue, a few blocks from here. It was a big data company. And these guys had every Wall Street trading firm in their systems. It was a hosted business doing data analytics. And a few years later, after the market crashed, they realized that they actually could have predicted the mortgage-backed securities issues because they had that data. They just didn't detect the anomalous patterns, and they didn't know what questions to ask. And we began figuring out, and they solved it by adding data scientists. These are PhDs who basically look at data, which an AI is much better able to do, just to spot the anomalous patterns so that you could ask the right question and have the data give you the right question. That's an immediate term use of artificial intelligence and deep learning, is to really look at large quantities of data for patterns in time, in space, in customer, and basically just tell me things that look weird in the data. and you'd be surprised at the interesting things that can come out of that.
And building on Cliff's point about human interaction and kind of augmentation, one permutation of that use is that you can take what might seem like a crackpot theory by a human and run it against that data using AI to see if maybe it's true, right?
Quickly and cheaply.
Yeah.
And in the story of the mortgage meltdown, there were a handful of people who were by and large considered crackpots and kind of crazy, and they were richly rewarded in the end, so we don't feel too bad for them, but it turns out we could have tested maybe against that, and that would have been its own thing. So there's a lot of opportunity there. Cliff, I want to let you weigh in on this, and then we have one last question, then we'll open up to questions.
They say that data is the new oil, and AI is absolutely useless without sufficient data. So you have to have, whether it's a company like ours where we see 25% of the world's, financial statements and, numbers, and, you talk about being able to predict when bad things are coming. We can do that. But there are privacy related issues. There's all kinds of. It's not that easy. Just because you have the data and you can use it, should you use it? There's ethical considerations. There's privacy considerations that all have to be sorted through. But the biggest, enabler that companies are going to have to get through is how do they acquire and how are they able to use the data. If you go into the terms and conditions that you have with your customers, with your suppliers, you may have that data, but can you use it, and do all the parties agree and consent to letting you use it?
Great. Let me ask one final question, which is roughly, can you please disabuse us of the notion that this will then lead to the robotic overlords who will, they'll be supervising us as we put the stuff in the Amazon box, right? And I'll set this up in the following way. The setup is this, which is my mother, who is an immigrant from Mexico, in her, when she was an adult, and she's very savvy, and she joked with me the other day, though, she's a good litmus test. She goes, maybe I should have let you run away and join the circus. I was like, pieces of it's misplaced, or don't worry about that, or we'll get a handle on it around whether it's superintelligence or aggregated ownership of like capital, which can occur if you get a superintelligence trading on the market. So there's a lot of stuff floating around that makes people scared. Can you help us be less scared? A little?
I can't.
All right.
Good time for drinks now?
Drinking after.
Yeah.
Are you familiar with the CRISPR
Oh, yeah.
breakthrough? Okay.
Yes. So CRISPR is an advanced gene editing system which is now going through CRISPR 2.0, which gets even better fine-tuned, and you can have, soon enough, a dog with butterfly wings, if you like, in your backyard. My son can use CRISPR.
So it's all good intent, right? They figured out a way to override the gene that causes cystic fibrosis, and there was also in Mexico the first 3-parent child that was born by. Now all of this AI is in advanced computing, advanced analytics is allowing these technologies to emerge. So I don't think that we're going to be working for a robot in the traditional sense or a computer in the traditional sense, but as biology and technology converge. So what's to keep CRISPR from throwing a few extra IQ points? Why stop at a few extra? Why not create designer babies that have IQs of 3, 4, 500? Why not 1,000?
Star
stop
Trek
there?
fans among us know
Right?
what law was
So-
passed and what year.
so- So it's this convergence of biology and technology.
Yeah.
Why stop at humans? Why not create really smart dogs? Why not create?
I think there's a Family Guy episode about that.
And we could all say that, well, the U.S. FDA would never let that happen. Well, it doesn't matter what the U.S. FDA does when you can do it in China, or you can do it in other countries. The information and the computing power is totally democratized. It's totally global, and the reach of regulatory bodies is obsolete.
If there's a microphone, he'd drop it and walk off the stage now. Okay, so with that, we're down to 2. Can you help us feel better?
Yes,
All right.
I would
So
push back on
all right,
that because I do not think that regulators
And then
or
we'll let you ask a couple
enforcers
questions.
are mute or no longer capable. I think that they very much have teeth and are really interested in this topic of AI and learning about it and wanting to figure out, are there gaps in existing regulation? What do we need to do about it? So I think a lot of the concerns if you look to the people who are really experts in machine learning and artificial intelligence and have been for a really long time, they are not the ones making these more theoretical, long-term concerns. And so what we've tried to do is really focus on the immediate concrete challenges that we know we have. So we've done papers on concrete problems in AI safety, right? So if you have a robot cleaning your room, what do you need to know about safety considerations? Bias is an immediate concern that we have about artificial intelligence. So there is a lot of challenges that we have today that we really need to focus on. There's a lot more research that needs to be done. We need to be developing solutions to meet those challenges. And those are the ones that we know of that are happening, that are today, as opposed to something that's much more long-term and theoretical and may not actually come to pass. Because again, if there's one thing that you take away from this panel, it's this is not preordained, right? We are humans, we are creators of this system. We have ethics. I'm glad you brought up ethics before. So I don't want to let that kind of be lost in this conversation of there's a lot that we can do in terms of directing a system what to learn or not learn. Ethics is going to be hugely important going forward, but this is not preordained. This is not set in stone. So I hope that leaves you with comfort, is that there's a lot that we can do, but let's focus on the immediate challenges that we have, and there's not really a shortage of those. So let's make this work as best we can to help us do more, and to really think about it as a tool for us, and not a future circus owner.
And we'll let Beatrice have the final word. But in the meantime, don't yell at Siri. Be kind. She'll remember.
Yeah, I actually think this is an interesting forward-looking theory, because we're at a point of really several tipping points. One is the whole biological. We can now grow ears, right? We can use a printer to print ears that can be implanted. We have things that are as smart as mice and will shortly be as smart as humans. And so I think there does come a point, and I think we're very close to it, when that pace of change outstrips our ability to understand the ethical implications, or deal with the ethical implications, or the regulatory implications. I've been in technology for many years, and as long as I can remember, I've tried to explain, like, to our people in Washington and so on. I remember back in the 90s at Oracle, when we were trying to explain how encryption wasn't something you could block at the port. It was because they say, well, just don't export it. It's like, it's a publicly available algorithm. Anybody in India or Russia can just look at it and write the code. So I do have some concerns. I think regulatory action can still have teeth, but I think technology is getting at the point where it almost requires sort of the infusion of technology into our politics in some way, shape, or form, because otherwise I think the regulatory environment could go very weirdly wrong. And so I do have that concern.
Well,
I wish I could have ended on a happier note.
I think a balanced note is okay. A balanced note is okay. So we have just a few minutes left only. Why don't we take a few questions from the audience? I have an endless list, but it's your turn. So any questions? There's got to be some question out there. Don't be afraid. The machine isn't listening. Yes.
With all the discussion on data and artificial intelligence and all the tools, when we go back 20 years ago, we were still filing things, and when you needed a report for a regulator that came in to look at something, you went to the filing cabinet, you opened it up, you pulled out a report. Here it is. Everything now gets uploaded to the cloud and everything. So I guess I haven't heard much discussion on the risks from a board's perspective, and the kinds of things that you think boards need to be thinking about and doing to protect against all of these wonderful tools. We all like, I like getting up in the morning and saying, Alexa, what's the weather like? But my wife tells me, somebody's listening on the other side of that, right?
Yeah.
So the whole artificial intelligence has that dark, evil side, and from a board's perspective, what do you think we need to be thinking about relative to the risks to the business?
I'm not the only lawyer up here, am I?
No, but I do think, so I'm not too concerned about Alexa and the boardroom just yet, because it's mostly a consumer product. But it gets back to what I said earlier, which is you need to know what questions to be asking of the CEO and the CIO, and you need to be able to assess whether with help or without, whether the answers are rational or not. So in the terms of protecting the data, you should be asking questions like, what have you done to protect against external threats? Ask a basic question like, Mr. CEO or Miss CEO, how many denial of service attacks have you had? And if they say what, then you know that you've got a problem, because if they don't know what a denial of service attack is, whether they've had any or not, or 1,000, they should at least have the answer. So have a set of questions that you can ask of, what are their security policies? What defensive software do they have installed? schedule a board review, for a couple of hours of having the CIO or the CISO or whoever it is, chief data officer, come in and do an inventory. And if they can't do an inventory, you've got a problem.
I would just add, don't ask them what they've done about external threats. Ask them what they're constantly doing about external threats, right? Security is, like anything, a cat and mouse game, and it's something where you should constantly be thinking about what you're doing to improve that. But I wouldn't stop at asking the CEO. I think those are all very good points. I would also say, what are you doing to train your employees? A lot of times when you've looked at privacy and security, sometimes it comes down to a single user or a human error as opposed to something else. So employee training, I think, is really, really important here. And I would also look at what are the benefits that you're getting from something like the cloud. So when you were talking about running your own server system, that was difficult. Security is expensive, and that may have been more susceptible to attack. Whereas when you have something that's backed by a cloud-based system where they're investing constantly and working very hard to harden their systems on a 24/7 basis, you're going to be getting security benefits from that too. So I wouldn't look at it as only a risk. I would look at it from what are the benefits you're getting from security. And on the point about listening to voice searches, I would remind you that most of the services have controls. So you have dashboards and you have controls that you can actually delete a lot of that information. I don't know about Amazon, but in Google, when you ask searches to the Google Home, for example, you can delete those. So you don't have to have somebody listening, I think is the way to say it. And don't forget about those kinds of controls. And as a user and as a customer, think about that when you're in your negotiations or choosing what services that you want to have.
Yeah. And back to the employee point, another good question for directors to ask is, what are you doing to protect against internal threats? And basic things like we would, as part of audit committee or your risk management committee, I'd like to see a quarterly report of how many employees were terminated, how many systems those employees were connected to, and when they were disconnected. Because I would almost bet you, if you did such an audit as part of your risk committee, that you would find that some employees had been terminated, but their access to the email wasn't, or their access to the internal, corporate intranet wasn't quite terminated. And you often discover that when something gets out in the public domain, or there's a lawsuit or something that you are broadsided by, and that's because somebody left a tiny back door open. So if your employee termination procedures don't involve, you push one button and it says terminated, and all access is terminated, guarantee you will have a problem somewhere in there.
Yeah. The risk calculus with AI changes. It's when you have a controls framework that's set up for people watching people, and you have things set up in more of a human type environment. If you are going to introduce AI into your operating model and into your business model, you really need people advising the board that know the technology and understand the implications of data and cloud and artificial intelligence, what it is, what it isn't, and help the board make smart, strategic, calculated decisions, because the whole calculus is different when you're dealing in a world where computers are making some judgments and decisions that humans were making in the past.
Let me throw in one corporate governance point that isn't about cybersecurity, and it's a practical one which you can act on right away, and that is realize that everything you do as a board, as a matter of process, is going to become knowable, discoverable, or discernible. What I mean by that, for example, is if you're using Diligent Board Services Board Book, it's actually very hard to scrub the metadata about when you looked at it, when you opened it. It will become discoverable at some point in time that you, the head of audit, never actually opened the board book on between pages 71 and 182, or that the PowerPoint presentation that was presented right before the M&A was actually only up on the screen for 2.4 minutes, or that you engaged in 38 emails and 17 texts during the 17-minute discussion about the comp that went really, really wrong. And this isn't theoretical at all. These are making their ways through the courts, and I'll tell you, there are now thankfully retired, working for big law firms on the defense side, former Delaware judges who have chatted with us at the Rock Center and said, would it have been possible for me to like now get from the Disney environment how much time the boardroom had spent, or if they were distracted during the OVIDs. Remember the whole OVIDs paying thing? They spent about 12, 13, 14 minutes firing him, paying 140 million. So realize that everything you touch now is, it's expensive now, but back to original theory, that cost and effort just keeps dropping. And in your environment, on the sexual harassment side, by the way, super easy. It is now easy to pull key cards. So I can't tell you how many cases there are where it's like, there was no such thing. Well, that's odd, because at 12:07, key card accessed, closet. 12:08, your key card accessed, same closet. And then both left, closet door open again 17 minutes later. Can you explain what happened in the closet, right? It's like, right? So, again, we're living in an environment in which data is ubiquitous, it is generally saved everywhere, and now it's siftable and discoverable, which is the difference. I mean, that data's been there forever, by the way. Sorry, now people are...
Now you're on the bubble.
I didn't mean to
It's only possible if you had intelligent
That's right.
knobs.
That's intelligent.
And there was a guy in the 60s who predicted that in the future, every doorknob would have a computer in it, and he was laughed out of existence. Never published again.
Alas.
Alas.
On that happy note, we're going to just stop here and thank the panel for their contribution. Thanks very much. And do I hand it over, or do I just say go to drinks? What would you prefer? We're done, and you can proceed to the drinks. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Susan. Good to see you.
Yeah.
Let's do it again next year. Hey, you know what? You always learn from these kids.
Nobody filled them out.
I couldn't ask a question. I didn't know what that was.
Right. Thanks very much. Yeah, that was really great. Yeah, it was fun. Yeah, absolutely. Cliff, doom and gloom. Oh my gosh. I loved it though. Thank you so much. It was great.